All right, in this video, we're going to be looking to see if a user is a role member. We're going to be using in the built-in function that SQL Server provides. So in this example, we are wanting to check if a user is the member of the owner, DB owner, or DB writer. And if they're not, we want to do something different if they're not in one of those two roles. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at that. So there's two things going on. One is the user that is executing this is the admin user, so it's able to get information about the roles. And then in the other results screen, there is the actual user itself that we're checking on, masked user, and that masked user is checking on the DB owner and DB writer status, and we'll see there is zeros returned. And it's using this is role member function here. So this is the admin user that's checking, and we can see that this user here is data reader only, and it's a SQL user. So one of the ways in which we could check if a user is a role member and do something differently, as we can see, that's one of the things that we would want to do, is that in this example, that is that if the user is a role member of DB owner, we'd equal 1, and data writer equal 1. I did put an and here. That could be an or. I see that now. And then we're going to actually do an insert statement. That should be of note. I haven't put the values here intentionally, so that way there's nothing information here about the health check. But we see that if the user is not in these, then we return 0 as the result set. And so the idea is the person could, let's say, if this was a query that they could run, or if it was code that they could run in the application, they would run it, but it wouldn't actually do any insert. It's just going to return a result set. Now, if it was a stored procedure, they would have to have execute permission. And keep in mind that data reader is not going to give them execute permission. We'd actually have to grant them a role that would give them execute permission, or we'd have to grant them the execute permission directly. And so in this case, that's why I have the TSQL code here. So this is one of the ways we can use this built-in is role member function, and we can. It's not my preferred method to do this, like do a check. However, there are times that you might do this in certain code for environments, for instance, within a stored procedure, in which you do want certain role members not to. But keep in mind one thing, and this is just right off the bat, but even though data reader won't be able to see, like for instance, if I pull up this user, if I log in as this user, it's not going to be able to see stored procedures that it doesn't have any access to because it's a data reader. If it's a user that does, and let's say we're trying to filter in the stored procedure, we don't want to give permissions to this user to do certain things like insert into a table, they could always just script the stored procedure, right? So if they have that type of access, they would still be able to do something with that. So we want to be careful, because this isn't going to mean that a person with certain permissions isn't going to be able to bypass that in code if they have the permissions to do that. So that's one thing to note here. So just in this example, because they're data reader, we would return a different result set, but they would still have to have some level of access to a query in order to do this. For instance, if this was in a stored procedure, I would just disable their ability to execute. In other words, they're not going to have that ability to execute the stored procedure. So there are other ways around this, but this is one thing that you can actually use this is role member. And then always keep in mind as well that Azure SQL and SQL Server are going to have different roles in them.